Hi, good morning. We are going to talk about the perspective gap. This is a word I've been tossing around a bit, and I just realized in one of my edits that I have yet to define it for people. So, this is it, perspective gap. Perspective gap is a term we have been needing in our society for a very long time. Perspective gap is the lack or inability to communicate between two different perspectives. We see this very common among parents and children, teachers and children, children, children and children. It's perspectives are something we see a lot with children because that's when it's most prominent, when it's most rampant, when it's most obvious. But we're not calling it perspective. We're calling it age groups or, well, they're two, well, they're five, well, they're seven. They're not going to understand it because they're eight. We need to abandon that and really sit down and call this what it is. It's perspective differences. A 2-year-old has a perspective of second level perspective. And in the 2-year-old's mind, the second perspective mind, it's very tribal. It means that the authority and the autonomy belongs to the tribal leader. In most cases, it's the mother or the father. They hold the authority, they hold the autonomy. You have none. In the third perspective, which is when a child hits around 3 years old, the autonomy and the authority is claimed, taken back by the individual, the 3-year-old. This is where you see those terrible twos and those tantrums. This is the independence stage. This is when they say, no, I'm taking my authority. I'm taking my autonomy. No. Now, this is usually where mom and dad really hit head with the toddler. And this is where our parenting, well, it goes to shit. And this is where a lot of perspective abuse starts, is right here. What ends up happening is the child who is now in the third perspective has reclaimed their authority and their autonomy, and mom and dad immediately engage in a power struggle. Common psychological term. A power struggle completely ensues between the authority figures and the toddler. Now, mom and dad are acting, usually, they tell themselves, out of protection for the child. In most cases, this is bullshit. What they are really doing is feeding their own ego and using their child to identify their own insecurities by being a strict parent on the child, by lording their own perspectives over the 3-year-old. What needs to happen, and I have seen this so many times, and it is beautiful when it's worked out very well. There are some parents who have discovered this on their own, or they read it in an article somewhere, and it's starting to catch up, and it's like, yes, this is the right answer. It's when the child says, I'm going to go outside without a jacket. And the parent says, the parent has two options. The prospectively immature parent will force the child to wear a jacket regardless. Wrong parenting, bad parenting. You have now taken authority and autonomy away from the 3-year-old. The prospectively wise parent will say, are you sure? This is called Socratic method. Are you sure it's like 5 degrees outside? Are you sure? And the 3-year-old will say, yes, I'm sure I don't need my jacket. Now, the wise prospective parent will then grab all of the cold weather gear and they will walk outside with their child, allowing the child the authority and the autonomy that the child requires to trial and error their own lesson. The child will go, okay, I want my jacket. And the wise parent will give the child the jacket, and the child will immediately be bundled up, and it's fine. This is proper embracing of the child's authority and autonomy. And what this does is it allows the child to have a mistake, learn from the mistake, and grow wiser. And after they exercise their own authority and autonomy, they move into the fourth stage, which is when they realize the importance of rules and law, which is fantastic for a 4-year-old. That's exactly what the 4-year-old needs. And it also paves the way for what's coming with the fifth perspective, which is when the child realizes, okay, laws have their place, but that doesn't mean I'm supposed to give up my identity, autonomy, and authority for the sake of the laws. These are lessons we should be learning at 3, 4, and 5 years old. But because we have parents who are unaware of this parenting method, they hoard the child's autonomy and authority, and they use it as leverage. That is what we see a lot. That is called perspective abuse. And what ends up happening is that child then grows up, well, really messed up and with mental illness. And now that's the world we live in, because too many parents are literally hoarding the autonomy and authority from their children as a means to control them. So, perspective gap is the lack of communication and understanding from one perspective to the next. We see this between children with the 2-year-old who wants something. The 8-year-old can see the 2-year-old acting irrationally or illogically, so says the 8-year-old. The 8-year-old goes to the mom and dad and says, they're doing this, because the 8-year-old sees the 8-year-old perspective. And the parents usually come back with, sweetheart, he's 2. What they're really saying is, he has a different perspective than you. That's a perspective gap. When the 8-year-old sees the 2-year-old and is like frustrated because the 8-year-old expects the 2-year-old to behave like the 8-year-old. But the mom and dad who are 40 expect the 15-year-old to act like a 40-year-old. The mom and dad who are 40 expect the 5-year-old to act like they're 40. Perspective gap. So now the parents at age 40 hold this 5-year-old to the standard of, why aren't you acting like my perspective? I have a 4th level perspective. Why aren't you acting like you're in a 4th level perspective? I expect more from you. Well, it's because those same parents conducted perspective abuse when the child was 3, and they withheld authority and autonomy from the child at 3. So, of course, the child is now permanently stuck at 3, because when they did that with perspective abuse, they also conditioned the child's psychological mind to go, the subconscious mind, to say, oh, it's not safe enough to grow. I have to stay at 3. So now you have an 8-year-old who is stuck at level 3. You have a 15-year-old who is stuck at subconscious perspective 3. By the way, that's highly aggressive and highly violent for a lot of people, which means that's when you see a lot of violence come out in children. So if you see your child who's unusually aggressive or violent, it's because they're stuck at level 3, because they never received autonomy and authority when they were 3-year-olds when they should have received it. We all require this stage. If you see someone with severe aggression, what they need is isolation. They need autonomy and they need authority so they can feel like they're in control, so they can get that back their perspective, so they can continue to grow in a healthy perspective ladder. But people have control issues. People want to feel in control by holding on to the authority and autonomy of others. And as a result, the child learns one solid lesson, that it's not safe enough to grow, that it's not safe enough to be their own perspective. So they get stuck. Now you have mental illness evolving out of that. So perspective gap is that lack of comprehension, lack of patience, lack of understanding, and lack of knowledge between the different perspectives. So by learning perspective thinking, you actually eliminate a perspective gap, because you stop seeing people in gender, religion, tradition, age, and you start seeing people in perspectives. Now, every person has at least 2 perspectives. We actually have 3 and 4 perspectives. The third, so this is 3 numbers. The first perspective is your ethical perspective. That is where the person has an ethical foundation. That's where they want to go. That's where their body and their mind is calling them to go to. So you can have somebody who feels ethically sound at a perspective 6. Now, they don't know this. They just have this feeling like they've got to grow. But the second number is that subconscious mind's perspective. And the perspectives are supposed to grow side by side with each other. So when you're at an ethical 1, you're supposed to have a subconscious mind at ethical 1. And they're supposed to go through the process together. The subconscious mind is supposed to stay with the growth of the child. But perspective abuse keeps the child locked in at whatever perspective they were taught through violence, aggression, abuse, neglect, that even disapproval, rejection, and abandonment, that it's not safe to grow. It's not safe to be yourself, and it's not safe to communicate. So that completely shuts down the subconscious mind, and it gets frozen in that particular perspective, while you're longing to be at a 6, but your subconscious mind is stuck at a 2. It's the subconscious mind that has to be at the 6, because the ethical perspective is already there. The subconscious mind needs to be there. And that's growing. That is us growing up, is the subconscious mind going through all the stages to get to whatever perspective it needs to get to. So once you learn perspective thinking, the perspective gap vanishes. It's a beautiful, beautiful consequence to all of this. So that is a perspective gap. Thank you so much. And you can learn more about this over at anashealinggarden.org. Thank you so much. And may the kindest of words always find you.